Welcome to the Saturday Cup of Joe podcast. This podcast is dedicated to EAS employees of the U.S. Postal Service and members of the National Association of Postal Supervisors. So, pour yourself a cup of coffee and join us for today's episode. And now, here's your host, Robert Wakefield.
Good morning, Branch 32, and good morning to our EAS friends across the country. Welcome to the Saturday Cup of Joe podcast presented by the Nashville Post Office Credit Union. I'm your host, Robert Wakefield, president of Branch 32. Thank you, studio audience. It's great to have you all here. So let's go ahead and pour that first cup. If you are not already a member of the Nashville Post Office Credit Union, why not? Now is the perfect time to join. For every new account opened, you will be entered into a drawing for cash prizes and gift cards. Stop by the Nashville Post Office Credit Union today to get your new account opened. The drawing will be held on December 6th. The Nashville Post Office Credit Union. Visit npocu.org. And for our first cup today, we're going to be continuing our series about the benefits of being in NAPS. And in previous podcasts, we've covered the topic of advocacy, and we've also covered the topic of representation. And today we're going to be discussing training and how important that is for our membership. You know, the NAPS recruitment package says this about training. It says members receive information on legislation, postal policy, and career advancement. Area training seminars are held on a variety of topics throughout the course of the year, and our annual legislative training seminar in Washington, D.C. teaches grassroots legislative techniques and provides important information on legislation of interest to members. So there's all kinds of different trainings that are available. And all this talk about training, it made me think of just one person, the person that knows more about training than humans should be allowed to know. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our very first guest on the Saturday Cup of Joe podcast. It is Brian Wagner. Brian, how are you?
Robert, I am great, and I'm the only one who knows all this information. I feel honored to be able to be on your first podcast as a guest. I'm very honored and very excited about talking about training.
Now, you've been training for a long, long time, Brian. When was the first time you remember ever giving any kind of training?
Well, Robert, I've been in NAPS for over 34 years, 31 as an officer. And I know as a branch president, I started doing training in the mid-90s with Dr. Nancy Wesley, the Illini area VP. She was actually a state VP. And what we did was adverse action training, 650, how to appeal. And she was instrumental on how I learned how to do great training, but also great appeals in learning how to build evidence packages and tab folders. It was fantastic. I learned a lot from her, but it's been in the 90s, almost 30 years. So
that's a long time. That is a very long time.
The gray hair shows it, but that's good. You know, it's. I figure every gray hair is wisdom I've earned, right? And hopefully I've given some. Okay.
I love that. I think that's fantastic. Now, let me ask you this, Brian. If you were to select, and this is kind of putting you on the spot, if you were going to select the most important training available to NAPS, what would it be? What would be the one thing that you would want every NAPS member to have in their training packet?
Well, probably the biggest one is how to stay out of trouble.
Right.
I know our members are trying to do a great job, but there's so many rules and regulations, and I know people do workarounds for the goodness of the organization to get the mail delivered, but there are things that our members do that get them into trouble. And what I've done, and I just did this training for the Montana NAPS branch on Wednesday, how to stay out of trouble. Mm-hmm. And it just different aspects to look for. There's different policies out there, but I know we're trying to do the best good intentions. That's probably one of the biggest ones. And again, I got a list of training, but also the rights of an EAS employee. What is your rights? What's the rights of EAS and the postal memos that put out, so that one, your rights aren't violated as a EAS employee, but also what do you do to stay out of trouble? So, and sometimes that goes hand in hand. So just want to make sure that people have that. I think every member should have those two types of training.
I think you're right, Brian. I think that one of the things that EAS members and NAPS members in particular, they don't know what their rights are, especially the new supervisors.
Case in point, I was fortunate to sign up a new member out of Pennsylvania in November, newly promoted supervisor. Postmaster's out on COVID. The supervisor's only 3 weeks into their job. A district team comes in on a Gemba walk. And this supervisor's like, they want to call her into the office because there were issues going on in the office she didn't know about. She goes, I didn't even know what my rights were. And she calls me because I sponsored her. And it was like, oh my gosh. She's like, I don't know what to do. So that actually drummed up your EAS rights. So I put together a presentation on that. And you're right. We have craft employees being promoted to EAS supervisors. You have the union guidelines under the collective bargaining. But NAPS doesn't have a collective bargaining, contract. But all we have are the policies within the post office and the memorandums or letters that NAPS has consulted on over the years that set policy in for EAS. Very important to know your rights.
So, and I think that is one of the things that you're offering, because you're now traveling the country offering these trainings to help EAS and NAPS members know what these rights are.
Correct, Robert. I started Zoom into training. One of the things is with COVID hitting, many branches are doing Zoom meetings, right? And I do training, and all of a sudden training kind of fell off because of COVID. But then we were discovering that once training started up, we were going to training conferences, and it's great to do. I love in-person training. You get a lot of feedback. But not every branch can send all their members. If you got 60 members, you're only sending a handful of members to training. So in this case, I thought, what better way is to try to offer training via Zoom at the comfort of your own home, any time of the day, any time zone. And fortunately, I was on the NAPS executive board training committee. But then again, I was the president and I put myself on that committee at the time. But we developed these training modules. And then I decided, why don't we do this by Zoom? I wrote an article about this back a year ago, and I thought maybe people would, catch up onto that, but no one did. So this past January, I sent out an email to all the branches. I'm offering Zoom training, and if you want in person, I'll do that. So I've been doing Zoom into training from the computer, and I've had branches and area VPs and state conventions call me in to give in-person training. Because I think training is essential to our members.
I think it is too. And it's a great thing that you're doing this Zoom into training that can help branches to get this training at the comfort of their own home. That's awesome.
Right. It is. And I will tell you this, when we do state conventions, which I love going to do training, but it's always tight on time, everything's structured. So if you're going to do a training at a convention and you're given 45 minutes to an hour, well, the problem is you're really doing the cliff notes of the training. What my training does, most of it's an hour or 2 hours. It gets into the weeds, and you get dialogue with the NAPS members who are on there with questions, concerns, what ifs, and strategies on how to defend somebody in a grievance or in a disciplinary case. And I just started a new one on grievances, because most people don't know EAS level 17 and below can file a grievance. And they're like, what?
That is something that everybody doesn't know. You're right.
And they're like, how do I start? What can I file a grievance on? So we developed that too. So again, we have the training from officers training, from president, secretary, treasurer, your rights for 650 appeal, what I call the basics, letters of warning. And then you have emergency placement. And then we move on to the advanced. Those are more serious, letters of warning in lieu of and adverse action, because we have a lot of new people coming into NAPS. Many of them want to be advocates. Of course, we're not stewards, we're advocates, but they're trying to learn, how do you represent somebody? How do you act how do you act in an investigative interview? What could you say could get you into more trouble? So these are some things we look at.
That's perfect. And now, when the Zoom in the training, you say it's available anytime that a branch would need this. Is that correct?
Right. I provide the training. If a branch calls me and they say, hey, Brian, can we do Tuesday at 7 p.m. Mountain Time? Sure. That's 9 o'clock. That may be 8 o'clock my time, but that's fine. I do any time zone, weekends, weekdays, whatever it takes, because I'm trying to be accessible to the members and the branches because, again, everybody's working a lot of hours. When can you find time to get this in? And if it happens to be at 6 p.m. on a Sunday night, then so be it. I'll make sure I'm available if I can.
There you go. There you go. So tell me how that branches can find Zoom into training. Where would we go to find that information?
Well, you would actually find it through me. You would either contact me via my email, which is Brian, Brian, 4naps, the number 4, at AOL.com. Brian for naps at AOL.com.
Okay.
Or my phone number, 309-253-5353. Pretty easy to remember, 309-253-5353. And I will tell you this, Robert, I just did a full mailing to all the branches in the country on my Zoom in the training. I sent a letter out with my flyer.
I got that.
And all the instructions. So I wanted to make sure, and I just started the new grievance training, and I also did a new one called Don't Pay What You Don't Owe on Debt Collection.
There you go. That's
because
good.
Even though we do debt collection, that's part of our disciplinary defense fund, but the post office changed the policy on how you do a debt collection now. You don't get to ask for reconsideration anymore. Either you pay the debt or they're going to take it out of your paycheck. So
nice.
Yeah.
that's great news.
Right. You don't get to say, hey, postmaster or manager, I don't owe this debt. I want reconsideration. There's no option like that anymore.
Wow.
So if you don't meet the deadline of filing for a petition to stop the debt collection, if you miss the deadline, this is the Debt Collection Act from 1982, you owe the money. It could be thousands of dollars. There is no, can I get an extension? It's an administrative type of judicial thing. It's through the courts, through the Debt Collection Act. So these are some challenges we want to make sure our members are aware of. Don't delay when you have discipline coming in. Contact your NAP trip immediately. If you got a debt collection coming in, a letter of involuntary salary offset, or even if you want to file a grievance. I mean, you can't wait 6 months and say, 6 months ago they didn't pay me my tea time. Well, the post office is going to say that's not really timely. So you want to make sure you're doing this correctly.
Exactly right. Well, that's great stuff, Brian, and I'm so glad that we've had a chance to talk about training because you're passionate about it. You write about this training all the time in your monthly articles in the Postal Supervisor, and I read this month's, and it was so interesting that you put in there. It was on page 103. It says, if you seek great training and information regarding your rights as an EAS employee, join NAPS. And I think that seems to be your theme, joining NAPS to get this information to everyone.
Right. Yeah, and to be honest with you, I don't know if you know this, Robert. I've been doing some membership recruitment. I was very honored to be recognized as one of the top 10 recruiters for over the past 2 years for NAPS members. And when I go out to try to promote, get newly promoted supervisors, newly appointed postmasters to join NAPS, I always tell them the branches, we do training, we do area training. And the thing is, we want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to be educated in NAPS. And besides the training I do for like discipline, how to represent yourself, what are your rights, we also do training on different things like nepotism, power networking, what are the consultative rights, mediation, things about membership. If a branch wants to know how to recruit members,
exactly.
What are the benefits of NAPS membership? Again, officers' duties and responsibilities. I even do things on for taxes, helping branches either file their nonprofit taxes or how to become nonprofit.
Gotcha. Well, this is great stuff, Brian. I'm so glad that you've joined us today on the Saturday Cup of Joe podcast, but I can't let you go without asking you what the ice cream flavor of the month is.
Well, I'm going to tell you, I have business cards that have the ice cream flavor of the day on the back, and I did a random one because I love ice cream. You know that, Robert.
Oh yeah.
And I picked pumpkin spice. So I know people say pumpkin spice, but you know what? That's what I'm drinking right now in my coffee. So it always goes good with my ice cream. So this is a double whammy. I mean, this is great. And I know people pumpkin spice, but I tell you what, when you're ever eating ice cream, the flavor can never be wrong.
And there you go. Well, Brian, thank you so much for joining us on the Saturday Cup of Joe podcast. We really do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Bob. And I have my Cup of Joe here with me, and I'm going to get my scoop of ice cream as soon as we get off the podcast here. All right?
I love it. Thank you so much, Brian.
Thanks. Have a good day. Thanks for inviting me.
Bye-bye. Are you stressed over holiday expenses and don't know what to do? Let the Nashville Post Office Credit Union help. We are offering a Christmas loan up to $1,200 at the low rate of 12% for 12 months. Not to mention no payments for 60 days. This offer is valid until January 31st. So stop by our office or visit npocu.org for more information. For our second cup today, I thought I would share a story I read. It was in Reader's Digest not too long ago, but this event happened back in December of 2017, and the article calls it Turkey's attack. And here's what the story is. A crew of hooligans threw mail service in Rocky River, Ohio, into disarray. And the culprit was a rafter of 8 to 10 wild turkeys who pecked at the postal employees and disrupted mail service for nearly 30 homes. Carriers had to get all kinds of different things to scare the turkeys away. One resourceful employee got an air horn and scared them away to the best they could. But after several weeks, they had to call animal control. And along with the Ohio Division of Wildlife, they helped out. And because they use loud noises, they routinely chased off these ruffled ruffians, if you will, out of the neighborhood and gave the carriers a time to get their jobs done. So I read that story and thought I would share that with you since this is November and it talks about turkeys. So if you're a supervisor in Rocky River, Ohio, I want to hear from you. I want to hear that story. That was from December 2017. And that story came out of Reader's Digest. Hey, thanks so much for listening to today's Saturday Cup of Joe podcast, presented by the Nashville Post Office Credit Union. Appreciate that so much. Appreciate Brian Wagner joining us on today's show. Now listen, I need your help. Please subscribe and share this podcast with all of your EAS friends. It's great that so many people across the country are listening to this podcast. Really do appreciate that. But I need your help in getting that word out. So, I'm Robert Wakefield. And remember, every great weekend starts with a great cup of Joe. Have a great Saturday, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for tuning in to the Saturday Cup of Joe podcast. Please note that the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of Robert Wakefield and do not necessarily reflect the views of the National Association of Postal Supervisors. We welcome your questions and comments, so send those to SaturdayCupofJoe@gmail.com.